Guys, welcome to RPE podcast number 5. We're going to be talking all things speed, so we've called it the Need for Speed. We're here today with Tom Frost, so he's one of our colleagues that has a very interesting story to tell, and it's going to be a good resource in this space for everyone back at home. So Tom, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, a bit about your journey, all that type of gear?
Yeah, boys, thanks for having me on. Awesome when you reached out the other day. It's been a while since we've had a chat, so it was really cool to get that message come through on a Saturday. I was surprised, but my journey, I started out up there in Brisbane and with Exintaris. So they've got a couple of facilities up there in Brisbane, and started out my internship up there when I was straight out of uni, and lucky enough to have learnt through their models. I think you don't appreciate it at the time, but the things that I was learning at those stages, I'd gone through, 3.5 years of uni by that stage, and what I learnt in 150 hours of internship with them just blew my mind, and was lucky enough to get a job at Acceleration up there. And then the path sort of took me along a road of development, which just blew my mind, and I ended up in PNG through the company. I ended up over in PNG looking after their athletes into the 2015 Pacific Games. So we had 1,000 athletes to prepare. We took 600 of them into the village, and I was the only expat in the sports performance side of things. So the only Aussie over there for that.
Nice.
And had to develop a fair few coaches to sort of help, because coaching 1,000 athletes yourself, you're not going to get much quality across. So
that's when
had a chance. I'd headed back for a bit of an outing to get away. Flew back down to Brisbane to do the level 2 over that 2 weekends, wasn't it? And I actually flew back in between. So had to get back to work. So I'm pretty sure I did anyway. I can't remember. It's a while ago now, boys. So I caught up with you boys at the level 2. I was still over there at that stage. Pacific Games finished and stayed on as their sports science manager in PNG. So I was 2.5 years in total over there. And then ended up down in Melbourne with the sister company of Acceleration, who's since rebranded to Ace Performance. And that's who I'm with now. So through that role, I've had the chance to oversee 4 facilities we had pre-COVID. A lot of sort of private strength and conditioning performance training for athletes. Same model. So we really pride ourselves on the technical speed and agility as a big component of our strength and conditioning for athlete development. It's been massive over the years. I've had the chance in this job to work in the Storm pathway as well, so in the under 18s and 20s as their head of performance. And I'm working with the UFC fighter, Jimmy Crute, as well, who's a Melbourne-based light heavyweight in the UFC. So that's been really cool to sort of work across the spectrum of athletes. We deal with all athletes, running and non-running, so I'm interested in all parts. But that's what's brought me here today, boys, and let's see what I can answer for you.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I always remember from when we saw you at ASTA level 2, you definitely knew a lot more about, I guess, from that internship kind of thing, way more than what you cover kind of at uni, of how to actually, not just on a book, develop someone for speed and whatnot, but actually how to, practically develop. You had a lot of really good little tidbits that I still kind of take with me going forward. So I remember I learned a crap load off you just there, you know what I mean? That was interesting. So it'd be cool to see how you actually, especially when you said that UFC fighter, it would be interesting to see how it differs with you developing what his needs of speed and agility are, and how you develop that versus how you develop your more kind of straight line versus kind of your field sport athletes. So I don't know, do you want to start with a general overview of getting an athlete and how you kind of start to look at what you need to develop and why kind of thing and how?
Yeah. So it's probably a good one, because the that ASCA level 2, for example, when we went out on court, that again for me was just a moment like, oh, like this isn't taught very widely in the S&C realm. You know, when we did, we actually had a bodybuilder that was teaching us about speed, which was quite funny. And then we went out on, powerlifter. And when we did that movement stuff with you in the small little group that we were in, Steve, and how that was an eye opener for me, because I just thought that everybody sort of learnt
How much I didn't know.
Yeah. And it was kind of really cool. It made me look like a wizard, and it was really quite simple, the stuff that we did. So
Yeah,
that's probably one of the reasons I was happy to come on, because I thought hopefully I can look like a wizard by saying some pretty simple stuff.
But it is like it's something that's not often taught, or it's something that's not even often discussed, because it's thought of as a specialist kind of role, like track. You know, if you're an athletic sort of coach, you sort of look into that stuff. But I mean, it's definitely something that I need to sort of upskill on. But yeah,
it's interesting because you find your own strengths as an S&C coach, and you're right. We only had this conversation as a company the other week. It's like there are specialist track coaches, but it's quite funny the difference between straight line speed from a track coach versus application of sport speed. You know, how they can be really quite different. Change direction, ability to decelerate, you know, all of those sort of things is quite, you know, the distance in which you can accelerate, or which you do accelerate during a sport versus in a straight line speed athletics, you know.
So those kind of reference points, I think like sport is, you got like, it's like 15 kind of meters-ish, 10 to 15 kind of acceleration. You got to, most like field sport athletes, you got to reach kind of top speed by kind of 30 meters versus kind of 60 meters on track kind of thing. I think that's kind of the basics.
Yeah, it's definitely about what your surface is and things like that, as well as footwear and things like that. So you talk about, you know, the different environmental factors that will be at play in terms of how long it takes you to reach top speed, what top speed actually is versus what it is on a tartan track in your spikes.
So do you find when you're developing an athlete though, so I guess the whole, and I'm not sure how actually like scientifically proven or whatnot this is, but the thought has always been, and I know it's been kind of a little bit disproven with strength, so this is why I'm not sure how relevant it still is with speed, but the thought is no matter what, you kind of want to build your athlete's top end speed, because then any efforts in the get like their top end, just straight line running speed, build their mechanics, all that in the standards like they're a track athlete kind of thing, because then any effort that they do in the game is going to be either like easier for them to recover from, because it's a less of a stimulus kind of thing. It's less of a percentage of their kind of max, and they'll also be able to reach that, I guess, a little bit easier.
Yeah, so we definitely go by the model of like building to that. Like you obviously wouldn't put somebody at a capacity, you know, like reps of 60, 100%, you know, straight away, because you'll blow a hammy or whatever it may be. So we build a capacity to that. But yeah, we'll absolutely train it, because you want to, I mean, you train for worst case scenario or beyond worst case scenario in all of your events. That's how, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that's our thoughts on how to develop an athlete. Is you want to make an anti-fragile athlete, right? You want as robust as possible. So if like the Storm Boys, for example, if they get into backfield and make a break, they're going to be running over 50 or 60 if they, you know, get over that distance, and you need to be built to be able to withstand that stuff. So what better way to build resilience to it than by building up to doing it?
So then what's it look like, say you are actually building, because that's a really good point in that, again, it's similar to what we've talked about with exercise prescription stuff initially, is you got to have a starting point, and then you got to be pushing their envelope of function along the way to get them to that, basically that bulletproof or that kind of resilient athlete. How do you know what someone's kind of starting point, or where do you start them, or why do you start them there, and then kind of where do you have to finish them? Where do you have to take them? What's your kind of, is it like a needs analysis kind of thing, or what's?
Yeah, so I guess probably it's important before we jump into that stuff to explain the two sort of different places that I'll be coming from in terms of giving an answer to that, because the answer to that is really different in a team-based scenario of the NRL Victoria pathway versus what it is individually for an individual client to come into one of our ACE performance centres, for example.
Mhm.
But in general, it's absolutely an initial assessment of whatever it may be, whatever's applicable to what the athlete's going to require, what they're there to train for, what you're going to be taking them through. For example, we do our own variation of an FMS because we know that we're going to be taking them through certain movements, certain functional movements in their gym program. We want to see where it's at now as a start point. But I really lose the plot with people when they say, oh, we want to go through an FMS. And I'm like, well, are you programming to those results, or are we, is it are we literally wasting our time? Is this all for show? So I'm big on that too. Like, it's got to have an application to what you're trying to achieve. Otherwise, you're wasting your time, really.
Are there like some speed mechanics kind of position? Like, do you first day get someone, obviously not trying to like bang out a 100% sprint kind of over 100, because as you said, you'll blow all sorts of hammies, calves, everything. But do you do like anything that's really kind of specific on that specificity print? Like, look at them doing some sort of drills or something so you can really see kind of mechanically. I'm guessing you kind of want them to have, not perfect before you start them on a running kind of program, but you're wanting them to have at least kind of decent mechanics before they get into it?
Yeah, so this is, with the initial assessment for us is always quite similar. We will make athletes sprint at 100% over 20 metres. Like, there needs to be a level of assumption that, again, if they've come into you and they've got, I'm coming back from a grade 2 hammy, blah, 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 that will change, right? So let's just put that out there. But there's a level of assumption that if Johnny comes in, he's been playing social touch footy and whatever anyway, he's been bursting for 20 metres, right? Like, he's going to be running, he's going to be playing and whatever. So there's an assumption that they have the capacity to sprint 100% over 20 metres.
And I reckon that, like, legit, people are way more, we talked about this previously, people are a lot more robust than I think we probably give them credit for, especially in physio. Physio, we think everyone's super fragile, like on the very edge of breaking at all times kind of thing. So I think
that's a big one. I think that's our industry trying to justify itself sometimes, like, oh, this is my position and I need to take them through this graded approach because it keeps me in a job longer, you know what I mean? It's like, well, maybe they're already doing that. I thought, like, a great example is when we take our athletes through when they come back to a return to like high speed running over 50s and 60s or whatever, we might do like a build 20, hold 20, decel 20.
Yep.
And like, I questioned the boys about that one day. I was like, footy boys, for example, like in off season, they've been playing touch footy. You can't tell me that they're not stopping on a dime to change direction in touch footy, or, like just playing with their mates in the park. Yet you want me to give them 20 metres to decelerate. Like, what application does that have? It's just those sort of questions that it's like, you need to think about going a little bit too far with justifying what you're doing, probably.
Because you don't want to be the one who accidentally broke them.
Well, this is true. Yeah, this is true. I guess there is a level of that which you have to be cautious of. But like, we're doing them an injustice if we're not pushing the boundaries. And you talk about the envelope of function, you're doing them a disservice if you're not. I like to call it just towing the line. Like, if here's the line where you're comfortable and uncomfortable, you need to get uncomfortable a little bit because that's going to bring about the adaptations and stuff. So.
Yeah, and that same with when we talk further with like your injury risk reduction kind of stuff. Like, they've found, this was, I think, Mike Young's work, something like that, that like you actually do have to touch, it's over 95% of max speed to actually have any injury risk reduction for hamstring kind of strain. So you actually do have to touch like high speeds. If you're running less than that, you're really not being specific to being able to help that hammy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, one thing that we go by, which we probably haven't in the past, is to get fast, you need to run fast. Like, you can't do it just by thinking about it or finding shapes in a gym and, like finding shapes with your movements and all that. To get fast, you need to run fast eventually so that you get the stimulus, to get a response.
Tom, do you find that above a certain percentage of speed or how fast you're going, that's where you look for some breakdown? So, like, you can run technically quite efficient at up to a certain speed, but then once they get above that speed, you start to see a little breakdown. Is that where you look for to improve?
I think that, yeah, I guess so, but it's not like you could say that for every single person, 95% is where they start to break down, because different people are going to be completely different. And I'll give an example of one of our boys that's within the pathway. He would take off, and we do the Bronco 1.2 where they go out 20 back 40, 60, and he would take off, and he, and fit, like really cardio wise fit, but he would take off, and the way that he'd be moving at 50%, because he knows he's got to run 1.2, was terrible. And I would say to the other coaches, I was like, he's not going to win this. And he'd be in front by a lap, with like 200 to go. And I'm like, he's not going to win it. And sure enough, he ends up coming in third or fourth or fifth, because you just can't keep moving that way.
Yeah.
Like, to exhaustion. So in answer to your question, it's kind of hard to say that it's a certain percentage, because it completely depends. Like, oh, mate can be moving at 50%, and you're like, that's terrible. That's not going to be efficient for you to run 1.2 at your fastest speed possible. So.
It's obviously individually specific, but you look at an athlete at a certain percentage, and then you see where they break down, where they need to improve to be more efficient. Awesome.
Yeah, so their capacity, yeah. So what we do is what we did with you, Steve, that day at the level 2.
We broke down just walking.
Yeah, he broke down on the way to the start line. We that's the way that we do it. So we go through the FMS, we go through range of motion. When pre-COVID, you're allowed to still get measures, physically touch athletes and stuff. FMS. And we video analyze a change of direction, so a 5:10.5, and a 20-meter sprint. So we video analyze the 20-meter sprint from the back, from the side, and then from the front. Mm-hmm. And that's just on the iPad, videoing on the iPad, and then throwing it into the video analysis software and just slowing it down and having a look. I mean, often you can see it through coach's eye after a while. You can see it through your coach's eye at 100%. You don't need the video analysis, but it's quite good to have a breakdown for the athlete and the athlete's parents to be like, this is what we're seeing, and this is why we're seeing what we're seeing. And this is the program.
What are the main kind of things that you're looking at to make sure that you're going, okay, this athlete has a decent enough competence that I'm going to be able to use training principles to actually improve them, versus, okay, I actually just need to clean up techie to get it to a point at which, it's competent enough that then I can improve it. So what are you looking for, saying acceleration, like early, late kind of acceleration, top flight type of stuff, decel, any particular kind of mechanics or anything that you really want to go through there? Is it all there's too much to go through, or?
I think, based on what I said before, we'll always drill them. So once they come in, that they'll be video analysed, and then they'll get their own programs, and then they'll do form work specific to improving them.
Yep.
But they'll always contrast it. So if you're talking about like bottom up, it's really a bottom up approach to coaching, in like part practice of movements through like marches and skips and whatever, wall drills and whatever it may be, and then always application to the whole practice, which is sprinting. So they'll contrast sprint after they've drilled, because again, there's a level of assumption that they haven't come into us without having run 20 meters before. So even if their technique looks atrocious, well, that's what they were doing before they got to us. So they're resilient enough, like you said, to be able to survive. They're not going to die we just need to work on that as we go. So you break it up into parts with your drills, and yeah, my big application here is I don't love giving much feedback on a contrast sprint, because what you need to get to is a level of movement autonomy where they've learnt the movements in the drills, and then that gets subconsciously taken into a sprint.
Yeah.
Versus having to overthink about it while you're sprinting, if you know what I mean. Like, you're not going to do that under fatigue, are you?
No. Mate, that's awesome. This is all really ties well back to last week's chat where we were talking about like your motor learning theories and your dynamic systems theories and everything. And there's like really, really good research initially came out of like your stroke population kind of stuff for part practice. And then you just let the cerebellum sort out, like you drill them in the part practice stuff, and then you don't really talk. You let them do the full task, and they've kind of got those movement patterns hopefully down. And it won't be perfect when you first get into it, but you kind of are going to get a better learning effect by letting their cerebellum and all those like intrinsic movement pathways sort itself out, kind of thing.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's something that as a coach going forward, you start to get more comfortable in yourself. I think, like, going back to that self-justification thing, you talk a lot, you talk a lot while you're coaching when you're a new coach, like you're wanting to justify yourself, and then you realise it, again, you've been doing a disservice, haven't you?
Yeah.
Mate, my best sessions, and the best sessions that I had, like, I didn't speak hardly ever. I wasn't queuing. I was like, the boys were just taking care of themselves. They knew what they were doing. They were actually coaching themselves. I was like, that's probably the level I want to get to, where you don't have to sort of intervene too much.
But you should, like, when you get to that point, you should be a coach that can technically add value, because you know what? I'm not going to be in the octagon with my UFC fighter. I'm not going to be on the field with my athletes. Like, I'm not going to tell her, like when they make a break in the backfield and you've got to think about 110 kilo winger chopping you from the inside and another one from the other side, and you've got to get around the corner, flick pass away, like, drive your knees, make sure that you're recovering heel to hamstring and getting that foot back underneath. And no, like, what's learned in the part practice prior to is going to be your worst habits are what you're going to come back to under fatigue or under those situations. So how good can you make their worst habits?
Yep.
That's probably a good point there, Tom. That's probably
yeah. Do you use so, like, interestingly then, going back to kind of last week's topic, Nick Winkelman, huge on coaching cues in sprinting. Like, that's what, like, most his kind of research has been about. Do you kind of use those different kind of cueing for, like, acceleration, the analogies and those type of things? Is that kind of what you do to try to enrich the athlete's own, like, learning environment in their head, so they're creating kind of the cue or a visualization that works for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that not initially, and I'm still not great at. Like, I think that the best coaches are really good at this stuff, and I catch myself internalizing cues still. Like, I don't think that's going to be out of me for some time, especially because I'm not doing a whole heap of face-to-face coaching right now. But you do catch yourself where you're, like, giving feedback of, this is the position you need to find and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, shit, like, they'd probably subconsciously find that if I found a better way for them to do it. And yeah, absolutely. Like in running and stuff like that, we're getting more so towards those externalization of cues so that subconsciously they can find positions without thinking about it.
It's the way we were taught, unfortunately, kind of initially. Like, I mean, you did cover it a little bit. I know in physio we covered a little bit in uni, but you just didn't realise how important it was, because you're there yourself trying to think about the exact positions that it has to be, and then someone's telling you in 1 or 2 lectures, external things are going to be best for learning. You're like, yeah, but I need to learn where all these positions have to be first. So I think that's what then you put into your athlete or your whoever you're rehabbing is kind of what you focused on the most in your training. But actually, people learn by kind of just doing.
Well, that's exactly right. The more that you know a topic, the easier you can explain it to somebody else. And it's the same with especially with sprint mechanics and stuff like that. It's like, I want to make things internal initially because I'm learning it as I'm saying it. I'm like, oh shit, that's the position that he should be finding here and here and here. And you're trying to make it this black and white ideal that this is exactly what it should look like. Therefore, I need to fix all of this right now. And then as the years go on, you're like, oh God, come on, no chance. I could correct, and I bet you bottom dollar with what we did in our level 2 that day, Steve, that you went away and you could have run the next day and it would have been terrible because what we did, I bet you I internally cued you a lot that day, and so I got an instant result. Yeah, got an instant result, but tomorrow you're not going to remember it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a massive need for ability to continually improve external coaching cues.
For our young coaches and therapists out there, would you say a pragmatic way if I'm trying to teach so when I'm teaching this subject at uni, I don't know, this is kind of my solution to that because they're young, they're just learning this stuff themselves. So then again, they're going through that stage where they're kind of having to verbalize it to kind of almost cement it in their own mind while they're also trying to teach someone. I'm like, okay, it's okay. We all kind of, again, go through this process, maybe using this process in your kind of part practice, like in your wall assisted A-march drill or something like that, where you can kind of use your cues, use your hands to position someone where you want them and get them to kind of just feel that position for a while. But then when you put them into the whole practice, just don't talk, just let them kind of do the thing, and then bring them back into another part practice drill. You can kind of do some of your work internalizing things, so that way at least you're not talking to them while they're doing the actual big task that they're trying to do, and you're not trying to cue them on something that's a big open task like sprinting as opposed to a closed kind of drill.
Yeah, no, you've hit the nail on the head, absolutely. I'm still big on that, is feel, get in position, feel it. Okay, how does that feel? All right, hold it, feel it, and then move through something else and then get back and hold and feel, and then you're right, when it gets to the whole practice, relax, calm the cues, tone it down, let it happen. And then, some brief feedback after the sprint, maybe this looked good. Again, here's an external cue for you next time. Break the glass, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Do you have any because we won't be talking through shapes and everything here. Do you have any resources or anything that you'd really direct people towards to get a good idea of the good sprint mechanics that you're wanting someone to reach?
We were really lucky. I'm not going to lie. We were really lucky that Acceleration had built all of these of their own accord. So video analysis screenshots of good versus bad, and sort of. So, I mean, they're not readily available. Sorry. You can probably Google them. Dean Benton did a quite a cool one. But it might be a bit excessive. I mean, Franz Bosch is huge for his running stuff and dynamic systems theory, but that's next level. That will blow your mind if you're a new coach. You've kind of thrown me there because my best resources were honestly the stuff that had been developed by Acceleration for the intern manual, which was really quite simple visual screenshots of sort of good versus bad you know, foot angles, knee drive, all of those sort of things. So, yeah.
Like, it's almost finding I have a couple of resources I can link, but I do think it's this type of stuff, because it happens a bit quicker, is a little bit harder to, or the learning curve's a little bit longer, that finding someone like a mentor is a really good thing in this space, I reckon. Like, someone to watch.
Yeah, that's huge. I think that's why it sort of threw me when you said that a bit. There was a lot of reading and stuff along the development, but I learned so much more from just sitting beside my two managers at the time back in acceleration, and then the physio that I worked with in PNG, and then, you know, like then now one of the directors that I work with down in Melbourne and stuff. Like, you learn. That's me anyways, and I think that there's massive merit in finding somebody who can be your mentor that you can just shoot questions to, because you're going to have specific questions that you can fumble your way through the plethora of different information that's out there on the net, or you can have a trusted source that you have worked alongside and you have a relationship with, that, you know, I'll still just shoot questions to, give a call to my physio mate and be like, hey, what about this? And like, the chat goes then for 2 hours and we're like, you know, where did the time go? And you get a bit off topic, as I tend to do. So, yeah, absolutely. Mentor's probably the best.
Getting a mentor in this space is probably a huge thing, and just don't be overcritical of yourself early. We've all kind of, again, you got to make a couple of mistakes in your learning, and that's just all part of it, unfortunately, isn't it?
Yeah. Your coach's eye is going to take time. A lot of time. It doesn't stop developing, you know, like, read your resources, find a mentor, and get out there and do. Watch people sprint, watch them run through, see it from different angles, do video analysis. That's a massive learning one too. And just learn from those sort of things. I think massive to build that coach's.
We'll talk about then sprinting as like a stressor itself, and how it fits into a program, and how you program sprinting, I guess, based around other stresses. So if you want to kind of take us through that, like sprinting as kind of a stressor itself maybe first, and volumes, intensities, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, okay, definitely. So let's again just go back to the context of this being completely different for the Melbourne, the Storm pathway, the NRL Victoria pathway, versus athletes in sessions for our centres. It's time restricted. So for all of these, when you're talking about stresses, our speed work will be alongside our technical work. Let's talk about the Storm pathway. The speed work will be alongside the technical session. So whatever the coach is doing too. So an understanding of the volumes, intensities, and whatever of their technical drills that they're doing at that point in time. And Dan, you'd know a bit about that stuff. But then their gym stuff as well. So there's, it's everything thrown at once, because unfortunately, not being professional, you can't come in for a pure speed, agility, and speed conditioning session and then come back this afternoon for gym or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. So you probably do throw the kitchen sink a little bit more so than what you would do if it was professional, where you had them full time. Mm-hmm. In terms of how you deal with that, there's some general views on how we would do that, how I would do that. And again, I hate the idea of black and white, but as a general gist, we work along, like for running in particular, so long, slow distance aerobic. Obviously, we just work through the energy systems really. Yep. So like a bigger focus on your, like building a capacity of, longer, and that could be aerobic intervals and things like that. The longer work, less rest periods, all of those things. And then we'll progress towards like higher intensity aerobic intervals. So your fartlek stuff, yep, where there might be some higher intensities, but it's continuous still. It has that level of continuity. Progressing to repeat speed efforts, which might be your 150s, whatever it is, which obviously can't be run at 100%. It's mm-hmm. done at 90 odd, like building to that capacity. Again, rest periods for that start to get bigger. So we're looking at working towards, your lactic and then towards your ATP, repeat ATP sort of work.
Yep.
So then obviously towards like 40s, 50s, 60s, which is your hamstring, trying to build those sort of top end speed with the 1:5 sort of work to rest ratio. So that's as a general gist, and then overarching all of that, we'll do 20-meter speed efforts, which is done, as I said previously, in contrast to what we're drilling at that point in time.
Yep.
Because I think that stimulus is applicable to what they're going to be doing in their skills-based sessions anyway, and things like that, which we spoke about previously. So that's kind of what it looks like, on the pathway of, we sort of follow the pathway of aerobic to anaerobic, but dropping bits and pieces of that short, sharp work in there with the movement.
Kind of exactly what, like Dan and I was saying, with how you're building a gym program as well. You're building a capacity for you with that type of stuff. Like, it's very much sounds to me as if, like, basically that earlier phase, you're building basically their ability to recover from things later, like that longer, slower distance. You're kind of just building their engine, building their tank, building their envelope of function, their recovery kind of resources, their ability to you rely on your aerobic system to recover from every effort of anything that you do. So you're kind of building that, but then you're always touching on other things, like other little biomotor qualities in there, especially for yours, like almost learning whatever you're trying to drill into them, so that they're getting that specific kind of learning practice stuff in there as well, which is that higher intensity work.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think going back to my UFC fight, it's the same approach to his work, like not doing actual running speed, but in his overall general conditioning, follows a similar sort of model. And with that, I think that there's a big psychological approach to the aerobic LSD sort of work earlier on in the piece, which is like training mentality. I don't like spending much time there because, let's face it, it's not, that longer, slower distance stuff is not really directly applicable to the sports. So build capacity there and then shift your way down along the spectrum, I guess.
Cool. And what do you reckon, say, again, if we're talking someone's like envelope of function, like just a general, we won't go give people a too black and white, like go start here, but like say volumes. So someone who really is touching this for the first time, they're not going to go out and program, 30, 50-meter sprints on a, 1 second rest kind of thing. Like, what type of kind of volumes in different energy systems are you finding kind of a minimum threshold that you kind of can hit with someone? And of course, this is individual specific and come back from injury specific and all that type of stuff. But kind of, you've got some general parameters that are kind of like a bottom end, kind of, you wouldn't want to brush too much higher than this as a top end unless you're doing it for a real specific, trying to, overreach and give them a bit of a break or something after.
We'll always do, 3 to 4 to 5 sets of their drilling work into the 20-meter sprint scenario. So, like, no matter where you're at, I mean, injuries and stuff are a little bit different, but even then, we want people to be getting back into low amplitude ankle dribbles and things of the sort. So low amplitude movement mechanics that are going to replicate running, that aren't going to be high impacting. We want them to do that, and we'd follow a similar path. So if, again, in the Victoria part there, if Johnny's come in and he's, a level 1 hamstring, and he's been handed back over from the physios and stuff, and he's not allowed to do top effort sprints yet, well, he'd be off to the side. And when the boys are doing their contrast sprints, well, he might be doing repeat dribbling, like to build capacity of low amplitude stuff. Another big one from our end is the running for conditioning stuff. So in our centres, for example, we only see athletes for, they might come in for a 45-minute session. It used to be an hour. It's like a 45-minute session, and you might see them once or twice a week. We had a big, we've got a big focus on making athletes move effectively and efficiently, and then making them as strong as possible functionally, in order to build a level of efficiency. And that's where we find a conditioning improvement from. Like, you talk about sport specificity, and athlete and coaches in particular, younger coaches want to get lost in this sport specificity. It's like, how else are you going to build capacity conditioning wise for your sport? Play your bloody sport, or train for your sport. Like, if I make you move efficiently and effectively and make you as strong as possible, go and condition in your sporting scenario. So that's getting a bit sidetracked again, boys.
No, that's perfect. We've said the same thing early.
We touched on that episode 1 in regards to specificity, and I'm of the same opinion. Like, to get better at your sport, do your sport, and then just move a bit more efficiently.
I think how strong do you want someone to get? That's what I was, like talking about other stresses. So what do you have, like, kind of baselines that you want someone kind of to be in any certain lifts or anything like that, or any certain type of things that you're like, do you have any kind of baselines that you're wanting someone to get to per body weight or anything?
Yeah, strong enough.
Yeah. Strong enough.
Yeah, no, we want it to be black and white. So we look at, I mean, we're always wanting an athlete to get towards 1.5 to 2 times body weight on a squat. The more that you can push them towards that would be a great one to find. There's also some good data on the single leg ISO, single leg hammy hold, back extension. Yeah. And weighting that up. So, isometrically, apparently, if you're talking about hamstrings, and this is where running actually gets you a better stimulus than doing the exercise.
This is very important for physios out there, because this is a return to play test that not a lot use, but has heaps of validity, I reckon, that single leg Sorensen's.
Yeah, so that's the hold the barbell and come up into a single leg back extension. Yeah, so the figures on that, I mean, Steve, you're going to need to cover this off for me, but it's massive because, obviously the body weight and the stimulus that's applied during sprinting is huge. So it's something like nearly 2 times body weight, isn't it? Towards that you have to hold isometrically.
Yep, very, very close. Yeah, and you got to hold it for, is it 20 seconds off the top of my head? It's 20 or 30.
I think it might be more. Yeah,
20 or 30 seconds.
So you think about that as a stimulus. Like, if you got in to do that in the gym, you'd be like, oh my God, this is unbearable. But you get out to sprint and you're getting those impact stimulus, through running. So that's where I think, that's where I'm a massive fan of drilling and low amplitude drilling for return versus looking for ideals in the gym, because talk about specificity.
Well, this is where, like, your gym stuff, the interesting work that Mike Young was talking about was like, they're saying whether or not sprinting is like at top flight, that end of your swing phase, whether or not it's an eccentric contraction or if it's just a failed isometric. And that's why the Sorensen's is really important, because that is basically, you're pushing the isometric as hard as you can till, like, whatever the failure kind of point is, you know what I mean? And that's really specific to that, like, end of your swing phase, start of a recovery phase kind of thing, where that hammy is, or the hip extensors, but mostly, your hammies, bicep fem are just under that much kind of load there. It is a real, I guess it's a big stimulus for those muscle groups. Yeah.
There's actually, Lockie Wilmot did a really cool prezzo on some video footage of Usain Bolt, and if you haven't had a look at the isometric function of those muscles in sprinting, then you need to look at it, because it's like you've watched the video footage of it and it just makes sense. I mean, the direction of the muscle fibers tells you that that's its main function is going to be. So, and interesting enough, shout out to the physio that I worked with up in PNG, Simon Morris, did the same thing. He did analysis of the isometric contraction for kicking through your quads. Like it's the same thing that happens through that swing phase. In the tension arc that you wind up when you throw the opposite hand back, it's all the same as sprinting, which was really interesting. So if you've got athletes out there that are having, in kicking sports, that are having quad troubles, have a look at your isometric quad stuff because there's value there.
Yeah. And so do you use much in the way of so you've got to build a base level of strength, isometric, eccentric, so like yielding everything, and then move them into much plyo work kind of in there, contrasting with their speed stuff, because speed is very much a highly plyometric kind of thing as well, to get that kind of the tension or the stiffness in your musculotendinous unit kind of thing happening.
Yeah. In short, because we've got that time frame that we've got, we'd probably get our plyometric function out of the sprinting with initial athletes. Like what we found there with our drilling and our sprinting has given the plyometric enough for that point in time. We make the focus around functional movement, stability, all of those sort of things. And that's just a time-based thing.
Yep.
Even within those, we call it steering, but even within those, there's levels of jumping and landing, which is lowest level plyo, but it still has a plyometric function. Your tall to shorts, your landings, that's the bottom of your plyometric progression. So there is components of that definitely, but it builds up in the same way that I spoke about the running before. Build the capacity. High level plyos will come in after you know that they're moving functionally and things like that. So
I think that's just the good underarching thing is kind of you build a capacity, then you get into like you touch little bits of specificity on the way, but it's building capacity, and each time it's just finding that next little envelope function, building it up to the next kind of, strength or plyo, and then into the really high level kind of sprinting. So it's not a linear build. You are putting other things in there along the way, but it is kind of building towards whatever that athlete's kind of end goal is. That's really what they have to be doing. But you kind of are building them up to that. So they're making that more robust, resilient athlete as you go.
Yeah, spot on. That's right. It's linear is not the word to use because nothing's linear, but you're right. You're trying to progress to that end point, however you can get there, undulating in some sense.
12.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Exactly.
All right, mate. Well, that's been an awesome chat. We could chat forever, I think, but we might have to let you go there.
Yeah, thanks, boys. It's been good. Sorry.
Thanks very much for coming in for, episode 5 of the RPE podcast, mate. It's been great having you, and we'll catch everyone. Just listen out for Connor's summary to come.